Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the wild world of exchange rates, and we're going to do it by looking at a fascinating real-world experiment, the early days of Israel's economy. It's an incredible story of crisis and tough choices that, honestly, has lessons for just about any country.
All right, let's start with this number. $15 million. When the State of Israel was founded back in 1948, that was it. That was the grand total of all the foreign money they had in the bank. For a brand new country facing, well, everything, that's not just a little, it's next to nothing.
Okay, now fast forward to today. That number has exploded to nearly $220 billion. That's billion with a B. So, how in the world did you get from 15 million to 220 billion? Well, that journey is an amazing story, and it basically gives us a masterclass in the tools that shape our global economy.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the British inheritance. Then we'll get into a new nation's problems, cover the huge shift of pivoting to the dollar, and finally, we'll unpack a really powerful idea called the devaluation tool.
All right, let's dive into part one, the British inheritance. You see, when the British Mandate ended, Israel didn't just inherit territory, it inherited a whole economic framework. It was like starting a new company, but you had to use the old owner's very, very British rulebook.
And that brings us to this key concept, a currency peg. From the very beginning, the new Israeli lira was locked, or pegged, 1-to-1 with the British pound. If you had 1 lira, it was officially worth exactly 1 pound. Think about what that means. The country's economic policy wasn't really independent. It was completely tied to the fate of Great Britain's economy.
And let me tell you, the starting position was incredibly tough. You have those tiny foreign reserves, just 15 million bucks. At the same time, the balance of payments deficit, that's the gap between what you spend on imports and what you earn from exports, was a massive $300 million. Oh, and on top of that, you've got 10% inflation. You put all that together, and you have the perfect recipe for a crisis right out of the gate.
So as you can probably guess, that brings us right to our next section. With a challenging start like that, it's really no surprise the new state ran smack into some very serious problems. It was time for a harsh dose of economic reality.
Here was the core of the problem. The country was buying way more from the outside world than it was selling. And to buy foreign goods, you need foreign money, right? Dollars and pounds. And they were running out, fast. So the government had to take some drastic steps. We're talking strict rationing on everyday goods, slamming the brakes on imports, which also made it incredibly difficult to pay for the housing and jobs needed for new immigrants pouring into the country.
Now, whenever you have that kind of pressure cooker environment, something predictable happens. A black market explodes. And people were so desperate for foreign currency that they were willing to pay nearly double the official rate to get their hands on it. This is so important because it shows you the truth. The government could say 1 lira equals 1 pound, but on the street, in the real world, no way. The official rate was becoming a complete fantasy.
And, a gap that big between the official story and what's really happening, well, it can't last forever. Something's got to give. And that forces a huge strategic shift, which brings us to our third section, pivoting to the US dollar and finding a new economic anchor.
This whole pivot didn't happen overnight. It came in stages. First, in 1949, the big ship they were tied to, the British sterling, suddenly lost over 30% of its value. That was a huge shock that pulled Israel's currency down with it. Then, in 1952, a reparations agreement with Germany starts providing a new, vital source of foreign currency. So by 1954, the choice was pretty clear. They cut the rope to the sterling and officially pegged the lira to the US dollar, the new heavyweight champion of the world economy.
And wow, what a pivot that turned out to be. In 1954, the exchange rate was simple. 1 lira got you 1 US dollar. But fast forward just 2 decades to 1975. After all the economic pressure and a bunch of devaluations, it took hundreds of liras to equal a single dollar. This change kicked off a whole new era, one that was all about using a very powerful and often very painful economic tool.
Which leads us straight into our final section, the devaluation tool. Because to manage its economy while being tied to the super strong US dollar, Israel started to use a controversial strategy pretty frequently. And it was a real double-edged sword, devaluation. So you hear this word devaluation thrown around in the news, but what does it actually mean? And for the people living in a country, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, as with most things in economics, the answer is, it depends.
Devaluation is basically when a government makes a public announcement and says, hey,
Guess what? Our money is now officially worth less than it was yesterday compared to the US dollar. Now, I know that sounds completely backwards. I mean, why would any country want its own money to be worth less? Well, it all comes down to whether you're trying to sell things to the world or buy things from it.
Yeah, this whole strategy is about creating winners and losers. The winners are your exporters. Imagine you sell oranges to America for $1. Before the devaluation, that dollar gets you 1 lira. But after, that same dollar might suddenly get you 2 or 3 liras. Your profits just went through the roof. The losers, though, are the importers. If you need to buy a machine from America that costs $1, you now have to spend way more liras to get it. Your costs go up, and so do prices for everyday people buying imported stuff.
And that right there was the government's entire goal. Make it more profitable to sell Israeli stuff abroad and make it more expensive to buy foreign stuff at home. The whole point was to try and shrink that giant, stubborn trade deficit and get more money flowing into the country than was flowing out.
And this wasn't just a one-time thing. Devaluation basically became their go-to play for handling economic crises. I mean, in 1962, a massive 67% devaluation. After the Six-Day War in 67, another 17%. Then in 71, a 20% devaluation to handle a global crisis. Each and every time it was a huge shock to the system, but they saw it as a move they had to make. So for decades, devaluation was this critical survival tool. It helped them manage those crazy deficits and boost their industries against all odds. But the fact that they had to use it again and again, it really showed the immense strain the whole fixed exchange rate system was under. It was a short-term fix, kind of like putting a patch on a leaking tire. And that leaves us with one big nagging question. With all that pressure building up, how long can you keep patching the tire before the whole thing just blows?